Thank you very much for joining us. Super excited to be joined here by Will Travers, who's the founder and executive president of the Born Free Foundation. You might have seen the Born Free movie, which Will was very closely tied to, but this is now a wildlife conservation charity that I've been following, and they're really actively looking at what they can also be doing with technology going forward. So super excited to be joined here by Will, who's going to be sharing some story and pictures and shares of what they've been working on until now in their past, and also what is possible and needed for wildlife conservation going forward. So really, really excited to be joined here by Will. Big thanks also to Tracer for supporting this series. So they're a connected value chain platform for the diamond industry, working to ensure consumer trust in the diamond industry and demonstrate provenance and traceability and authenticity of natural diamonds and help the economies where they're mined. So anyone can find out more at community.tracer.com. That's TRACR.com. So to everyone who's joined us, thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you, Erica, and thank you everybody for tuning in. My first curry club meal.
Hopefully not the last.
Yeah, hopefully not the last. So thanks again. And as Erica says, I'm very keen to share with you in a fairly rapid fire way kind of where Born Free started, what Born Free's been doing for the last 37 years. We had our 37th virtual birthday party only about 3 weeks ago. And also just a glimpse as to what's on the horizon, what we're working on for the future. So without further ado, I will take you back to 1964. And this is why I'm closely associated with the film, because that's my mum on the left and George Adamson in the middle with the hat, my dad with the dark beard, and Joy Adamson. And of course, George and Joy, super famous for Elsa, the story of Elsa the Lioness, and Born Free, the book, which then became Born Free, the movie. And George in the middle there was the technical advisor on the film. So kind of everything that my folks learned and how to behave with lions and how to interact with them in a way that was caring and consensual was learned really from George. And, you know, in the days when there's no computer generated graphics and there's no doubles were used in this and no animatronics, you know, this film, which you'll probably find somewhere on some channel late at night, it's a bit of a perennial favorite, is for real. What you see is what you get. So real people working with real lions in real time. Not all the people were with the lions, as you can see here. There's the crew, the director, James Hill, standing in the cage, and then various other members of the crew as well, and my mum with a lion in the same space. So all very challenging and interesting stuff. And I think the reason why the film has had the longevity that it's had is simply because it's a love story, and it took nearly a year to make in Kenya in 1964. I went there as a child with the family, and it took that long to build the degrees of trust between the human actors and the lions that allowed the story to be told in such an authentic way. Anyway, after the film was made, 3 of the lions that were used in the film were returned to the wild by George Adamson. My parents and George and Joy negotiated and got 3 of the lions, by no means all of them, sadly. The rest of them went to zoos and safari parks, but 3 came to George and he returned them to the wild. And my dad made a film about that called The Lions Are Free, his first documentary. And here he is at George's very modest little camp in Meru National Park in Kenya, National Reserve, I think it was at the time. And that is an elephant skull that they are sitting on and chatting about wildlife in the world. And that's began a process for my mum and dad of making films that had strong wildlife or animal components. There was Ring of Bright Water about the otter based on Gavin Maxwell's book, but there was also a sort of light-hearted family film called An Elephant Called Slowly. And here is the elephant called Slowly. She's a female, she's about 2 years old. And the script required an elephant of this age She had actually been caught on behalf of the government of the day in Kenya as a gift to the London Zoo. And by interceding, my folks waylaid her for 6 to 8 weeks while the film was made. And after the film was made, they asked the Kenyan government if they could buy her and have her returned to the wild by Daphne Sheldrick and David Sheldrick, the famous Sheldricks. Daphne passed away a couple of years ago, but her incredible legacy through the Sheldrick Trust continues. And the government said, yes, you can, but we will go and capture another baby elephant and take that elephant away, tear that elephant away from her family and send her to London Zoo. And so rather than put another elephant family through the trauma of that, this elephant, Poli Poli, which means slowly in Swahili, went to London Zoo. And my folks had no association with for 10 years. They thought it's much better she makes, as it were, new friends or new acquaintances, at least at the zoo, and we should not be part of her life anymore. It would not be fair. But then they heard that she'd become very difficult to manage and that there was even a rumor that she should be put down. So they went to the zoo to try and see the Poli Poli for themselves. And this next photograph is, I think, quite extraordinary because they hadn't seen her, as I say, for 10 years. They came, they called out her name. She came down from the back of the yard and stretched out her trunk to reacquaint herself with my mum and dad. And we began as a family a campaign, or certainly mum and dad did, to have her return to Africa because she was miserable in the zoo and she was alone. She was the last African elephant at London Zoo. And the authorities declined, even though we found somewhere for her to go. But they did agree that they'd move her to Whipsnade, which is, maybe is the sort of larger country park zoo that's part of the London Zoo setup. The move was a failure. She collapsed, and injured her leg, hobbled around for a week, and then they gave her an anesthetic to check the leg, and she did not respond afterwards, and they euthanized her, and she was just 14 years old. That's sort of pretty much the equivalent of a 14-year-old girl in human years, because they live just about the same. And we just thought that can't be right, cannot be right. So we thought, well, who is looking at what's going on in zoos and wild animals in zoos and the rest of it, apart from the zoo people? And the answer was really nobody. So we set up a tiny little organization with £6. There were 6 founders, who each put £1 into the hat. We called it Zoo Check, to check on zoos, and check as in stop the exploitation of animals in zoos, and started our work. And here we are in those early days. Founded in 1984, and we started looking closely at what was going on for so many wild animals in captivity, such as, here is the way they used to keep elephants at the Blackpool Tower Circus. This was exposed by us and the Mirror in 1985, deep underground in the catacombs below the Blackpool Tower. They used to keep elephants like that. We also looked into polar bears in captivity and ran a campaign with the Mail on Sunday, which indicated that 80% of polar bears in British zoos were, according to the paper, being driven mad. They were showing stereotypic and psychotic behavior, and we began a campaign to bring that to an end. And it isn't quite over. There's still, I think, 1 zoo in the United Kingdom with polar bears, and it might be 2 zoos actually, but there used to be 9. And then we were confronted by a gentleman who was a taxi driver, but he also had a circus. And in that circus, it was called the Cross Brothers Circus, he had some tigers. And we managed somehow to get them from the council. The council confiscated the tigers, and we then took the tigers to India and released them into it's not the wild, it was a sanctuary. It was 15 acres of forest near Bangalore. But, compare 15 acres of forest to, what is that? 50 square feet, 60 square feet in a beast wagon. There's no comparison. And so we started to look even more seriously at what was going on a larger scale. And one of the things we did was, firstly, we published a book with some musings on the subject, but we also looked into the number of zoos in the European Union. And the best list available at the time was about 350, 370 zoos. By the time we'd finished our survey, which took 2 years, we'd found 1,007 zoos. And the truth is, there's many more than that. There's still about 3,500 zoos in Europe. We also branched out, if I can put it that way, in 1989, because, of course, many people ask us the question, if you're not in favor of animals in zoos and other forms of captive exploitation, what are you in favor of? And we said we want to keep animals, wild animals should live in the wild and they should be protected there, with all the challenges that go with that. And one of the biggest challenges that was prevalent in 1989 was the bloody ivory trade. And so we campaigned massively on that. And I actually physically drove a blue Ford Sierra Estate from Guy Salmon, sponsored by Guy Salmon. I don't know if Guy Salmon even exists anymore. I hope it does. I drove 600,000 name petition on paper. So you can imagine the car was like on its beam, to Switzerland, to a huge conference on wildlife trade that was taking place there. And it was at that conference that the international ban on trade in ivory was approved. We also were working at the time to end the exploitation of dolphins in captivity in the UK. And there were very few dolphin area left, to be fair. The government of the time had introduced measures to increase the size of pools based on a report by Klonowska and Brown, and none of the aquaria that had dolphins wanted to spend the money. So we ended up actually with 3 dolphins, 1 from Morecambe and 2 from Brighton. We flew them to the Caribbean, to the Turks and Caicos Islands. At the time, that had been the only direct flight that had ever flown between the United Kingdom and the Turks and Caicos Islands. And ultimately, they were released into the wild. It was a project that we called Into the Blue. We also worked with experts to end the exploitation of wild animals as photographic props. And that was going on in beach resorts in Spain and Portugal and Greece, where particularly young chimpanzees were exploited in this way. They often were drugged. They were often burned with cigarette ends to make them compliant and live in fear. And when they got too big, age 3, maybe 4, they would be destroyed and another would be found. And that's because they just became simply too dangerous. The captivity side of the work went on, but also we started to think about the wild side of the work. And I'm immensely proud of the fact that since 1992, so a very long time indeed, we've been supporting the Amboseli Trust for Elephants. It's a fantastic picture of an elephant family down in Amboseli in Kenya, taken by Martin Kolbach. And pretty much, I wouldn't say everything, but a huge amount of what we know about wild elephants, about their social behavior, their language, their clan structure, their family structure, is because of that long-term piece of research. I mean, that's why long-term research is so incredibly important. I'll whip along a bit quicker now. My dad, in the last year or so of couple of years of his life, he went around lots of slum zoos in Europe, and he recorded what he saw. He took photographs and he took film, and he particularly recorded this stereotypic psychotic behavior, which he called zoochotic behavior. And he produced a thing with Dr. Roger Mugford, who's an animal psychologist, called the Zoochotic Report. And the word zoochosis has now pretty much entered the lexicon to describe this aberrant behavior, this coping mechanism that wild animals in impoverished captive circumstances display. I was also very pleased in 1994, which was sadly the year that my dad passed on, to establish the Species Survival Network, looking at wildlife trade, being the precautionary voice against a rampant wildlife exploitation. And that is still going to this very day. I'm very pleased to be the chair of the board and the president of that organization, which has 90 member organizations around the world. We also, the following year, started supporting, I don't know if anybody watching this knows what this species is. Obviously, it's a member of the dog family. It's a wolf. It's the only wolf found in Africa. It is the Ethiopian wolf. There are only 500 left in the world. There are none in captivity. They only survive 10,000 feet above sea level, 3,000 meters. And they're not a pack hunting animal. They're not persecuted particularly, but what they're incredibly vulnerable to is rabies. Rabies that they contract from dogs that live around the protected area with human communities, and then the wolves get rabies. And in a bad outbreak, you can lose between a quarter and a third of the world population of this incredibly endangered species. We do that in partnership with the Wild Crew Unit, the Wildlife Conservation Research Unit at Oxford University. Here are two magnificent tigers, Bill and Ginny, rescued from an appalling zoo in Belgium. And after that rescue, we actually moved them to our sanctuary, our forest sanctuary in India, where they lived for many years. In a similar vein, here are two lions. They had been kept on the roof of a bar in Tenerife, where they had been reported to us, reported by tourists who were appalled at the horrible sounds that were happening when stray dogs were being fed to the lions. We got them out and we took them to our sanctuary, which still operates in South Africa at Shamwari. Then I had an experience, how shall I put this? I had an experience with Liz Hurley. Liz Hurley very generously offered us 48 hours of her time. We flew her to Uganda. We did a photo shoot with one of the celebrity magazines. The fee for that was $50,000. Liz gave us the $50,000, and with that, we helped buy this island, this 100-acre island in Lake Victoria, which is now described by Jane Goodall as the gold standard for chimpanzee sanctuaries in the world. It's 100 acres. There's about 3 acres for the people, 97 or so for the chimpanzees, and there are about 49 chimpanzees on that. Here is a leopard, now sadly no longer with us. He came from the UK, again rescued from Tenerife. He was actually accompanied by another leopard from Abidjan Zoo in Côte d'Ivoire. There are lots and lots of animals in really appalling, dreadful circumstances that we somehow have to try and help, and we can only help a tiny fraction of those in need. The following year, in 2000, we launched Travelers Animal Alert, which we now call Raise the Red Flag. And this is really responding to the needs of tourists who see something that they're unhappy with involving wild animals, animals in captivity or animals in the wild, and they don't know what to do. Well, now they can come to the Born Free website and report what they see, and we will try and amplify their concerns and their voice. We decided in 2001 to launch Born Free USA, our sister organization. It's a separate legal entity, and it focuses on many of the same issues, but also some slightly different issues. You know, orca in captivity. Probably many people watching this have seen Blackfish, the movie, which really was the nail in the coffin of the captive industry in terms of exploiting orca. But we've got exotic animals as pets, wild animals in circuses, trophy hunting, a really big live issue at the present time. In 2002, I was very fortunate to go on a giraffe relocation project with Joanna Lumley. There's Joe in the Land Rover. Joe is our founder patron, was with us right from the very start. And we managed to both capture and relocate 11 giraffe, very endangered subspecies, the Rothschild giraffe, in Kenya, and move them from one location to a new location where they've been doing extremely well. What do we got next? We also started to really engage with communities. And so here is our Global Friends Initiative working with schools. And on the program now, there are about 16 schools in 4 African countries that we work with, trying to not change people's attitudes, but trying to bring a sensitivity towards wildlife and allow people to make up their own minds as to whether wildlife should be protected or exploited. We also, in India, launched a landscape level project. That's a really big project across a wide area of land, which incorporates a number of official government tiger sanctuaries. But between those areas, there were 9 local non-government organizations working, and they hadn't, even though they were only 50 miles apart, they never really talked to each other. And that didn't seem to us to make any sense. So we basically offered to support them by creating a network that they could be part of. And that's now the Satpura Landscape Tiger Program in India. In 2005, we worked with the government agency in Kenya, the Kenya Wildlife Service, to actually prevent the export of 300 wild animals that have been caught or were going to be caught for zoos in Thailand. And it was just extraordinary that on the one hand, you have the statutory body in Kenya responsible for its wildlife saying this shouldn't happen, supported by organizations like Born Free. And then you had other actors in Kenya who obviously saw this as an opportunity, I think, to make quite a lot of money. And there's nothing wrong with money, you just have to use it wisely. This is a fantastic setup in Vietnam and China. It's called Animals Asia. We're big fans of Animals Asia. We actually raise funds for Animals Asia. We're great friends with Jill Robinson, who founded it. And this is trying to get the bears out of the bear bile farms. And I've been to a bear bile farm where each bear lives in a crate that's probably 2 foot longer than its body and about 1.5 foot wider than its body. And that's it for life. And it has a steel catheter put into its gallbladder. And every day someone comes and turns the tap on the catheter and drains bear bile. And that's used in traditional Asian medicine. It's the most miserable, awful life you could possibly imagine for any sentient creature. And they have a fantastic rescue center, which I was fortunate enough to visit with my mother just a few years ago. And it's a sensational job that they're doing. In 2007, here's a lioness called Bella. And Bella, of course, means beautiful. And I wouldn't say that she's the most beautiful lioness I've ever seen. Her teeth are a bit knackered. She's lost an eye, but goodness me, she had a beautiful spirit. And we flew her down to Malawi, to a center that we support there. And there's my mum. And what you can't see from this photograph, obviously, is that she then turned and she looked at my mum, and they held that bonded stare between the two of them for what seemed like forever. It wasn't just a second or 2 or 10 or 15. It was like a 30, 40-second interlocked stare. And I guess she kind of knew that people were not all bad. Then in 2008, I put this in because it was another film that my dad made called The Lion at World's End, about a lion cub that had been bought by 2 Australians, Ace and John, Ace on the left, John on the right, who'd bought a lion cub from Harrods pet department when it was possible to do that kind of thing, which it is not allowed to do now and doesn't want to, I'm sure. And they kept him in their furniture shop in the King's Road in London. Dad went in, they saw him, they recognized him. Long story short, Christian came to live in our garden where I live now. And ultimately, after 4 or 5 months later, he went to Kenya, was released into the wild successfully by George Adamson. And the boys went away. And then they came back 10 months later, nearly a year later, just to see if they could find Christian, and filmed this extraordinary reunion between them. Not something I would either recommend or even advocate now, but nevertheless, a sort of moment captured in time. And that film has been seen, that little clip called The Reunion has been seen 40 million times on YouTube. In 2009, we established an education center at a rescue facility that we had been given. We'd been given the land by the president of Ethiopia. And it was for rescued animals. It was to help wildlife law enforcement, but it was also to offer an educational opportunity to Ethiopian kids, a different vision of Ethiopia. I think perhaps we have a rather stereotyped view of Ethiopia as a sort of dust bowl, but actually this looks like, I don't know, the Lake District. And here is this what was a gun emplacement in a military range that we have converted into a thing called the treehouse, which is our learning facility. And there's my mum surrounded by some fabulous Ethiopian kids. In 2010, the sort of history repeated itself. We had these two dolphins that were trapped in a pool in Turkey. A Russian guy had built the pool, was charging tourists $50, $60 for 20 minutes to swim with the dolphins in this feces and dead fish infested and water. They were dying. He fled. We paid off his debts and we got them out and we returned them successfully to the wild in the Mediterranean. In 2011, of course, the issue of keeping whales and dolphins in captivity came up. We did a report about this with the Whale and Dolphin Conservation Society, and we've revealed, and we continue to reveal, how inadequate captive circumstances are for these amazing creatures. This is a dolphin. It's the biggest member of the dolphin family. It's used to ranging hundreds of square miles, and it's kept in something that is barely a postage stamp representation of its habitat. And it's not a habitat, it's just a pool with chemicals in. On a happier note, this is the fantastic Cosmos Mumba, who works in Zambia to release primates that have been rescued back into the wild. It's the Zambia Primate Project. It's got a over 90% success rate. And these animals would have been tied down in people's garages or abused or chained. And Cosmos pretty much single-handedly goes in, gets them out, and releases them successfully back into the wild. As is the story of Douglas, the hippo, who we helped as well, again in Zambia. And Douglas we thought was a girl, but Douglas turned out to be a boy. And Douglas went back to the wild, and there is the most extraordinary, I wish I had the photo, I mean, he looks great there, but when he sat on the tarmac under the wings of this little plane that he'd been flown in on, and it was just this little hippo sitting on the tarmac going, what's going on? It was, yeah, cute, to put it mildly. And then in 2014, we went back to Meru National Park. You recall that photograph of my dad and George sitting on the elephant skull in Meru National Park. This is where Elsa was released into the wild. It's where Elsa's buried. And we went back to start some really intense work on lion protection, counting the lions, protecting the lions, working with the local research team. And we've been doing it ever since. And there's some good news, which I'll come to in a moment, because we are rapidly coming to the end of this presentation. Now, in 2015, we managed to take Jora and Black, Bulgaria's last two circus lions, to our center in Shamwari. And so that process of rescue, in fact, I'm right now in the process of getting a tiger to a sanctuary in Italy, and hopefully four lions to South Africa that have come from a circus background. We campaign, we continue to campaign. There I am with Dr. Mark Jones, who's our head of policy, and we're talking about all sorts of different challenges that we face, and the fact that the United Kingdom, which tries to tell people how they should look after its wildlife, is one of the most wildlife depleted countries in the world, and that we barely put a fraction of the resources necessary into protecting our own wildlife and prosecuting wildlife crime. So we're always on that particular case. In 2017, we began support again in Meru National Park, because it's a landscape approach. We started supporting the conservation of rhino in Meru National Park. They have a very successful sanctuary inside the park itself, so a fenced off area, 80 square kilometers, more than 80 square kilometers fenced off, but with rhino in it, both black and white rhino. This is the white rhino, a female with her calf. Of course, highly targeted by poachers, so there's a very active anti-poaching force there, who do a fantastic job. And then in 2018, we came across this little guy. He's a little lion cub called King. He was actually in France. He was owned by a guy. He'd been bought by a guy who kept him in his flat and thought it was cool to kick him, and then post the footage of him kicking and abusing this lion cub on social media. Unfortunately, for him, and fortunately for King, that was his undoing, because he was caught, arrested, and sentenced, and King came to live with us, as it were, in South Africa at our sanctuary. And then in 2019, we started to really expose, and many had done this, but we took a slightly different view on what's called canned hunting. And I don't know if you're familiar with canned hunting, but it goes on in South Africa. There are 300 facilities in South Africa with up to 12,000 lions bred in them. They're bred for the bullet. They are literally taken away as cubs from their mothers at days old, raised by volunteers, paying volunteers who believe that they're looking after this little orphaned animal, which it's not. When they're a bit bigger, people go walking with them every day and pay for the privilege. And when they're too old for that, they're offered to trophy hunters who can choose the animal online, just size of mane, color, all that kind of stuff, come over and at a significant discount, shoots their animal in an enclosure. It's a large enclosure, but there is no escape. So this is what's called a no kill, no fee operation. And so we did a film about it called The Bitter Bond. And that frankly won a ton of awards, because it was, if you haven't seen it, please do go to the Born Free website and have a look at The Bitter Bond. And then following on from that, we reflected on life in lockdown with a film made by Aardman called Creature Comforts, and using the voices of real people, the animals, all of whom are in captivity, reflect on their lives in a captive situation, and how that in some way is now something we can all resonate with, because we simply haven't been able to get out in the way that we used to. And I think it has created a lot of empathy for the current situation. And then finally, this year, with the pandemic and everything else, we produced a film made for us by a lady called Madeline, brilliant filmmaker, Madeline Westwood, and she made this film. Joanna Lumley kindly did the narration for us. Again, it's available on our website. It's called Protect Them, Protect Us. 3.5 minutes long, and it really does deal with the root causes of the problems that we face, and they are not because the bat is not at fault, nor is the pangolin. It is us. It is our abuse of nature and the natural world. The fact that we consume, and that we put ourselves into more and more remote places and come into contact with wildlife, and whatever wildlife has and carries will come back with it into our societies. And tragically, and I absolutely mean tragically, we are now sort of paying the price for that. But I said that there was good news, and I'm going to give you quickly some good news. Tiger numbers are up in India. Wild tigers are up. In 2020, there were over 3,000 tigers reported in India, and that's more than double the 1,400 that were recorded in 2006. So things can change. Kenya's lions, I mentioned to you before, I had good news about lions. Well, in Kenya, the lion population has increased by 25% since 2010. Again, in Kenya, the elephant population hit a low point due to massive poaching in 1989 of just 16,000 animals. It's now more than double that, 34,800 elephants. And the interesting thing there is that the human population in that time has doubled. So Kenya has been able to double its human population with all the pressures that brings, but at the same time, it's been able to double its elephant population. And then in 2020, Kenya reported zero poaching, and I'm touching wood as I say this, zero poaching of rhino in its rhino sanctuaries and reserves. So that's the good news. Those are the values that underpin Born Free: integrity, compassion, ambition, courage, kindness, respect, loyalty. And we try and cleave to that every single day. Our team in the UK, our 35 employees in the UK and our 100 employees around the rest of the world. And we try and cleave to that every single day. And And that, for me, is the sort of the face of Born Free. That lion somehow sums up that integrity and that courage and that determination. And so, to end, what are our plans for the year ahead and into the future? We're working hard to ban the import and export of wild animal hunting trophies. We want the EU to close its domestic ivory markets. We are working with the government to introduce a comprehensive ban on the keeping of primates as pets in the UK. And frankly, there could be other species as well. I don't know if anyone saw the Ross Kemp show last night or a week ago, the 2 parts of Ross Kemp, Britain's Tiger Kings. But there are 4,000 dangerous wild animals being kept by private individuals in this country. And, it seems like madness to me. We have those 4 lions that I want to get down from France to South Africa. We have 4 servals, which is a smaller type of wildcat in a friend center in Belgium. We want to get them down to South Africa. We have a tiger in that same place in Belgium. We want to get him to Italy. We're going to help review the new Kenya wildlife legislation, the Wildlife Conservation and Management Act. In the US, we want to pass the Big Cat Public Safety Act, which would prohibit the private keeping of big, dangerous, big cats. And so Tiger King and Joe Exotic and all of that stuff, which was a sensation on Netflix, has had a real impact, and it could lead to the end of the exploitation of those animals. We have lots of other plans I could talk about, like Pangaea, the elephant sanctuary that we want to create in Europe, in Portugal. Anyone listening to this, if you have, I'm going to say this, and I'm going to say it only once, if you've got about 28 million euros that you're wondering what to do with, then help us buy 1,000 hectares of land in Portugal and create a really big elephant sanctuary for up to 50 elephants, all of whom need rescue, all of whom are going to go out of business as circuses and zoos with elephants decide not to keep them anymore. Where do the elephants go? Well, we have to have an answer, and we believe Pangaea is it. But anyway, that's kind of it from me. I don't even know how long that took. Oh, well, not too bad. Sorry, I ran over a bit. But we've got a bit of time, and I know we don't want to go beyond the hour. So Erica, I am all yours.
That was amazing. Thank you so much for us. Trying not to cry, and it was sort of as horrific as it was amazing, but really grateful to you for that. I mean, I've got a whole bunch of questions. There's been a few questions posted, and there's a few people I've unmuted Magnus, so I know we'll have some amazing ideas, because I mean, partly I guess the intention of this, we've got a tech community and some great ideas, and it's also looking at what can be done. Is there any use cases of technology going forward that would be able to help you guys? The first question, just to sort of get a few of those out there from Monica. All this amazing work you did, how did you get the funding? Well,
okay, so on the funding side, we're funded by the public. We're funded by our supporters, our animal adopters, by corporates that support us like Kingspan. We're signed up to all sorts of exciting platforms where people can generously give if they wish to. We receive virtually no state funding at all. I say virtually none because, in the last 30 years, we have received probably about £300,000 in government grants, and we do get the gift aid back on donation. In terms of the tech, I mean, I'm not a techie person. So it's sort of almost like a bounce ball. I need to throw that back and say, I've given you a sense of what our challenges are, but how can tech help us? I know we use radio collars, for example. We're helping small household level communities in the Masai area of Kenya to protect their livestock at night from predation using reinforced, they're called bomas. It's like a corral. So they bring all their livestock in at night. We've done 330 of those, and they have helped 6,000 people and about 80,000 head of livestock. But they've also, of course, from our point of view, helped make sure that lions are not then attacked by local people as retribution killings because they've killed a goat or a cow at night. I want to find somebody who can design low-cost modular ranger housing, which can be put up and taken down in remote areas that doesn't get infested with snakes and scorpions, and gives the rangers who are doing the frontline work for us on all our behalves a sort of a reasonable place to stay when they come back off of patrol. I've heard about this thing, I'm going to say this wrong, NFTs, non-fungible tokens. Goodness me, I'd love to. I don't know what that delivers, but I'd love to have some sort of, highly valued work product, something that could be sold that would help us raise funds. I noticed that through the GameStop and Reddit community, 3,000 people adopted gorillas. I think Ellen DeGeneres was sort of partly involved in promoting that, but 3,000 people adopting gorillas just generated $1 million for gorillas. I've got elephants, giraffe, lions, tigers, wolves, all sorts of pangolins, orangutans, gorillas, chimpanzees. These are all species that we support through sanctuaries and their protection in the wild. I'd love to find a community that could say, "Oh, we'll do that. We'll step up. We'll find a way." And so I sort of, as I say, I with greatest respect, bounce it back to this community for any ideas and support.
Well, the NFT side, I mean, it's popular at the moment, and I think that possibly could help get sponsorship or bring money in. So happy to make some introductions just separately after this to companies that I think will be happy to help you on that. Well, there's a few questions through from M. What are your biggest aims for the next 10 years? And from Vicky, how has COVID impacted Born Free and the lockdown?
Sure. Well, just the COVID one briefly. We've changed as an organization. We've pivoted and adapted. We have relinquished our office. We no longer have an office. We all work from home. We will have a meeting space, which will be 20% the size of our former office. We are cutting our international travel by 75% as a policy decision. It's not because we can't travel. Even when we can, we won't. We won't travel nearly as much as we used to. We will cherish each trip because we are a UN accredited carbon neutral wildlife charity, and we're very proud of that status. Our teams have been in lockdown in the field, so they haven't been able to necessarily get out as much as they could in country, but we'll always put the safety of our people first, but we will continue to try and do the very best we can for the animals. And then, gosh, what was the other question?
Well, it's what's next for the next 10 years? The next huge big thing. Well, we're very engaged in a whole range of policy issues, but at a programmatic level, I have to say that we're super excited to be involved in a plan that would see the second biggest protected area in Kenya created out of Meru National Park, Kora National Park, Bisanadi National Reserve, Mwingi National Reserve, Kitui National Reserve, and Raholi National Reserve. Now, that all sounds like a lot of names, but it's six protected areas that all have a common boundary. They have different status, but that's 11,000 square kilometers. That is about half the size of Wales. And by being part of that and creating what we call a landscape level approach to wildlife, people say, well, why do you pay such a great attention to lions and elephants and giraffe or whatever? And the reason is because if I started talking about antlions or weaver birds, I would not get the space and the time. But I know that by protecting elephants and giraffe and rhinos and lions, I'm protecting all the species that share their habitat. And in Meru, there are 300 and something different species of bird alone. So it's an escalator approach. Is it about appealing to what people will feel for?
I think it has to be. I mean, there's room for conservation and protection of all sorts of different species. But if you want to leverage it, you really have to find the ones that people will resonate with. And as I say, if I start talking about, I don't know, a mongoose species, there will be people who will want to support that, but it will not have the same appeal and power as saying, will you help me with this lion cub?
Yeah, no, for sure. Well, we've got Man in here who runs stock payments, and I think there's been a separate conversation. So he's quite keen to help you get set up to be able to receive cryptocurrency donations. So for anyone that's holding crypto, I believe there's tax incentives for donating that. So hopefully that'll be another additional income stream for you guys, so you can receive that in pounds or other currency, so that you don't have to deal with the admin of dealing with Bitcoin. But
and I should say, Erica, I'm sorry, I didn't fully answer the question about COVID. Of course, no events. Corporate side of things is much more difficult than it used to be. Trust and grants are also more difficult. So, you know, our income as an organ, and we're not a huge organization. We're a £5 to £6 million organization a year, but with ambitions 100 times our size. It is hard to make everything work, and we've had to do a restructure. We've lost 10 people.
Sure, no, for sure. We've got Magnus in here who I've unmuted, and I'm gonna pick on. I hope you're there, Magnus. Magnus heads up innovation at EY in Nordics, and is one of the most creative and kindest and generous people I know in the space. So I'm sure Magnus will have some ideas. Magnus, can we pick on you to come up with any ideas for tech or blockchain or NFTs or anything that Will and team might be able to work with?
Of course. No, first of all, thanks for sharing a fascinating and touching and story, and it's definitely great work that you guys do here. So, but when it comes to sort of the tech side here, as well as you said, Erica, I think it's all about sort of the processes here and what we can do in sort of long term, short term, and not necessarily specifically throw it onto the blockchain hype, but as you guys mentioned as well, for the short term, of course, the NFTs, as you mentioned, William, is clearly hot these days, and there's opportunities towards, in the same way as one chooses to invest in a digital virtual picture, a piece of digital art, one could create the same things among the animals here as well, i.e. that you could create either animal arts for that purpose in itself, but also towards specific animals, towards whether or not you want to be a huge contributor, i.e. you connected towards one specific animal that could be connected towards the NFT in itself. And also it's down to, I'm not quite sure how you guys work in these specific countries, from country to country, how much you guys depend on, call it local human power, i.e. if you rely on voluntarily work from locals as well. But there we see also that other companies that has been presented by Erica on the Crypto Curve previously is doing a collection of plastic garbages in third countries, for example, and where the community has been set up that these persons are rewarded by tokens, i.e. that you guys do not have to transfer local currency to them or so on, and that you have a pickup point sort of saying that can be verified towards the QR code and a wallet, the e-wallet that is connected to the person that is collecting the plastic garbage in this example, or i.e. in this example, helping you guys in terms of what else it could be that you are needing assisting on, and it could be a more efficient way for them to receive sort of payment in so matter. But I'm not sure, William, how much you guys depend on local forces.
Yeah, well, Magnus, thanks so much, and so much in there. On the plastic front, we know plastic is the bane of many countries, including our own. And I see plastic all over the streets of Nairobi. Not the bags anymore, because the bags are are forbidden, but the plastic water bottles. And in fact, years ago, I had the notion that if I could hire the street kids to collect the plastic, take the plastic to a pellet maker, have the pellet maker spin the fiber and produce high quality branded fleeces for the tourist market, the kids get paid in tokens which can't be redeemed for glue and can't be redeemed for cigarettes and drugs, but can be redeemed for a range of different products or services, like educational services or health services. And we have M-Pesa in Kenya anyway, so there's a very well-tried route to payment electronically from phone to phone type of thing. All of those things are super exciting. As far as local people, all our people are local. In other words, I have no non-Kenyans, and by that I mean I have no white Kenyans. I have all African Kenyans. I don't mean to that be rude to white Kenyans, but we have only African Kenyans working for us. We have only Ethiopian citizens working for us in Ethiopia. We have only South African citizens working for us in South Africa. We're completely committed to being an agent of change, but ultimately, it's not my country. It's not my wildlife. The responsibility for the future of Kenya, Ethiopia, South Africa's wildlife lies with the citizens of those countries, and we must try and open up conversations, and we must try and amplify voices, but we should not be. I was once called an eco-imperialist by a minister in an African country on a live interview on South African TV. And I just said, Minister, not very helpful.
No.
That, I mean, to interject Magnus's point, there's a few companies doing that. Plastic Bank, and I'll happily point you to them later. Well, Plastic Bank from Canada, they've now gone huge, and there's I think they're Norwegian in power.
Yeah.
And they have this concept whereby anybody can be incentivized. In their cases, it's to pick up plastic, but it's in a way it's a very simple structure where people are incentivized and get paid in digital tokens, which they can then swap for food or cleaning products or school fees or whatever it is. And maybe that's something that Magnus or other companies can help with, because the technology is already there and set up. So in theory, it can just be replicated, or like you say with M-Pesa or something, where if people can be incentivized to, I don't know, not abuse animals or whatever it is, I'm sure there's...
Or to plant trees, or to...
For example.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's so much that can be done.
Exactly. And I think it's also, when you're talking about Africa, I think it's also down to call it political questions about this in terms of the local SACCOs, etc., of how people who lives down there are sort of dependent on, call it, the tribe king towards whether or not they are sort of allowed to move out to do this or not, etc. So actually we work together with Norwegian company who is now building payment infrastructure for both banks and central banks down there. So that's where we have clearly touched up on this one. And I just received a colleague of mine from Norway who has been living in South Africa for a couple of years now and building the community. So hence that's why we are a bit into this one. And I actually have Norwegian relatives living in Kenya as well. So I'm more than happy to also set up a one-on-one with you, William, afterwards and connect and have a chat there to see what else we can do in terms of synergies towards these players, because lots of these things, as you said, it's not about the sort of it's a challenge towards the white man coming down there, and as you have experienced in terms of building up trust together with the local community, as far as I see it. So it's as much as that part as the technology itself, but also ensuring that the local persons are actually paid for this one in a fair way, and as you said, yeah, that there's a transparency element towards this, so you can
Totally.
ensure that these persons are not using this for, call it, drugs or other illicit purposes, and rather using the payment for something useful for the community in general. And that's where you depend on the SACCOs itself to sort of stamp this as a good approval on it.
I think that's absolutely right. And it's sort of two things that springs to mind very, very briefly. One is just a personal story. I pulled in at a fuel station in Kenya, and these two little boys, I guess 9 and 10, came up, you know, in rags and said, you know, begging. And I said, no, I'm not going to give you money, because I know what you're going to do with it. You're going to spend it on glue. And one little boy said, no, no, no. And as he said no, his hands dropped to his side and the glue bottle fell out by his foot. So I said, So I said, no, we'll go into the shop. We'll buy some bread and some fruit, and then you'll sit outside and I will sit and you will eat it, and I will at least know that I didn't give them money for glue, that they had something to eat that day. You know, it's that kind of personal interaction. And then on a sort of completely different level, you made me think of Roundup technology, you know, the technology that says, if I'm buying something for 79 shillings, I can just have it rounded up to 80 shillings, but add 1 shilling or add 1 penny or 5 pennies or whatever it happens to be. And using Roundup technology, the cumulative impact is massive, potentially massive. And that can go to, well, if it was me, it would go to the kind of causes that Born Free supports.
Cool, thank you. There's 2 more questions for you, Will. Have you got a few more minutes to stay over the...
Yeah.
Amazing, thank you. From M, how can younger people get involved? And then a question from me, how can we get involved? Be that us, be that Crypto Curry Club, be that the tech community, what can be done?
Younger people, where we produce a lot of educational resources aimed at kids at home, homeschooling kids, at families, at the teaching community. We have a good, strong link with the Times Educational Supplement. And all these resources are free, you know, downloadable and free, which is the start of your journey. Engaging kids and younger people in the issues and allowing them to make up their minds. You know, there is this huge amount of pent-up frustration in the sort of young generation, the 15 to 22 generation, and it's manifests itself in, you know, Extinction Rebellion on the street, and abandoning school for on Fridays just to fight about climate change. It's the frustration of it all, and then the inertia that follows that, because you get the sweet words from the politicians or the leaders, but those sweet words are not turned into action, and we don't have time. You know, as I say, I started on this 37 years ago, and I'd love to think that there was another 37 years to go, not just for me, but because that would give us time to overcome these challenges. We don't have 37 years. We have 10 years, in my view. We have 10 years to renegotiate our relationship with nature. And if we don't renegotiate it, I'll just use this figure, you'll understand it. The estimated cost to the global economy, and I probably underestimated this, of COVID is $26 trillion US. 26 trillion US dollars. The cost of investing in nature at a scale necessary to halt and then reverse the declines in biodiversity and protect wildlife and wild spaces is 800 billion. Okay, I can't even work out what the percentage is.
Nothing in relation.
It's just tiny. It's 4%. 3 or 4% of what the pandemic has cost us, and that cost is going to keep going, as you all know, long into the future. What can individuals do? I mean, I would say, please visit our website, see what's out there. You know, we have animals that need lifetime care. We have rescued animals that cost us. We have to raise £10,000 a year to make sure that that animal's looked after properly for the rest of its life, having had that miserable life up until now. If you want to go big scale, there's that big project that I mentioned for the elephant sanctuary. But just come and browse what we are doing. And if you feel motivated to do something, then as this slide rightly says, do get in touch. There's my email address there. I would be more than happy to talk through and explore ideas with with anyone. I'm always looking for solutions, and I don't have all the answers, but I kind of feel like by talking to the Crypto Curry Club, I may be talking to people who do.
No, thank you. And a question from Ian Redmond. So I know you're familiar with Ian Wilbert. By way of introducing Ian just very quickly to everyone else, he's an amazing conservationist who is also involved in a project called Rebalance Earth, who Born Free are helping out. And it's a project set up looking at effectively the value that animals bring. I'm not doing a very good job of explaining it here, but looking at some of the animals that are killed just ruthlessly for their tusks or for various reasons that are effectively, if you're looking at the value that these animals bring to the earth by way of carbon sequestration or other things are worth more just in financial terms alive than they would be when they're killed, and they're just killed so quickly and so mercilessly. And that's a project that Born Free are looking at partnering with and helping. Is there anything that you can say about that? And excuse my butchering of my very poor attempt to explain the Rebalance Earth project.
It's a fantastic project. It's possibly the most exciting thing I've come across in my professional life, because it's transparent, it's secure, it has benefits to biodiversity, climate change, local communities, sustainable finance, and the killer fact for me was one that Ian explained to me. Ian is a long-standing good friend. He said, if you have a piece of forest in, say, the Congo Basin with 200 elephants in it, there are two ways of extracting value from those elephants. You can go in and you can poach them, and the poacher will get perhaps $100, and then the middleman will perhaps get $1,000, and someone somewhere will end up making some money, but the total value is perhaps 40,000 US dollars, if that, frankly, if that. Or through Rebalance Earth, you can say, well, a forest that has 200 elephants in it, compared to a forest that has no elephants in it, the carbon value, the carbon increase, the sequestration increase in the forest with elephants is 7% more. And the IMF, Ralph Chammy, has done the calculations and worked out that that is valued at $80 per living elephant per day for doing nothing, for just being an elephant in that forest. So if you took that forest with 200 elephants in it and you applied the $80 per elephant per day value to it, you've probably all worked out already, but that's about 6 million, 5 point something million dollars a year, every year, while those 200 elephants are alive. And imagine if through that mechanism, you were able to better protect both the elephants and the forest, so that the forest grew in size and the elephant population also grew in size. The amount of money coming for the eco guards, for the rangers, for local businesses and communities, schools, hospitals, development, but in a way that is absolutely intrinsically aligned with the protection of the forest and its biodiversity. If somebody turned up at your door in that community and said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to pay you $50 to come into the forest while I kill an elephant and you can carry the ivory back, you go, I get more from one elephant into this community in a day than you will give me for taking the life of an elephant that is worth $1.75 million over the lifetime of the animal. Are you crazy? So suddenly your community is no longer passive. Your community is an active defender of their natural resources, their forest and their elephants. I can't think of anything more exciting.
You did a far better job at describing that than I did, so thank you. Thank you. Well, I have a question. You showed earlier a picture of burning tusks of the ivory, and my question is, why would one burn them? In the sense that I know they've obviously been taken illegally, but there obviously is a financial value to ivory tusks.
Yeah.
And in burning them, does that not encourage people to just go and get more?
Well, no.
I.e. to go and kill more elephants just to get fresh ivory tusks to replace those ones that are already there.
There's been a lot of ivory burned over the years, and it has come about as a result of the mistake that was made in the late 1990s and then into the early 2000s, where we thought, not Born Free, but the international community thought that they had a handle on the illegal ivory trade, that they had basically stopped it. They then said, well, why can't we just trade a little bit in a very controlled way, only to 1 or 2 countries, etc., etc. And it released the floodgates of further poaching, because there's all sorts of economic reasons why we don't know about the elasticity of the ivory market. Ivory prices are extremely fluid. The mentality of people who want to make a fast buck of killing elephants far outweighs the financial costs and the human costs of protecting elephants. So people die, elephants die. Ivory is the currency of death that is used. And we've always maintained, as we do for rhino horn, that you can't have a legal market for this stuff, because the legal market, I'll use my hands to demonstrate this. Look, that's my hand. That's the legal market. I put it near my face. That's the legal market. Let me show you. Show me the legal market, because I've just covered it with the illegal market. You can't differentiate. The two sit on top of each other, and the data suggests very strongly that there is no room for a legal ivory market, just as there's no room for a legal rhino horn market, because it will accelerate. If you were a poacher, Erica, and there was a legal market in rhino horn, and the book price on the legal market for rhino horn was $40,000 a kilo, you would come to me, the buyer, and you'd say, listen, Will, don't pay 40,000, don't be a mug. I'll get you the stuff, 20,000, half.
Because it's free to just go kill one.
Just because it's so, and the young men, and it is exclusively young men who go in to the protected areas and kill rhino, are the absolute mugs in this, because every life is expendable, and where there's one, there's always another you can hire. So the people who run these rackets, they don't care about anything. They only care about the money.
Yeah. No, thank you. And I mean, is that the same for trophy hunting? Is there anything that particularly can be done to stop that?
I think that trophy hunting is going to become a sort of an anachronism. I think it's going to be something that will be consigned. It's an extraordinary concept. There's no African society that trophy hunted, that killed animals for fun. They might kill animals for ceremonial purposes, they might kill them for cultural purposes, but nobody thought in African society that it was a cool thing to go and kill an animal for fun and stick its head on a wall. That is an elitist Western construct that's largely funded by American trophy hunters. The American trophy hunting industry is extremely powerful and extremely wealthy, but it is in its twilight years. It will disappear, in my view, and the British government is taking a strong view on this at the moment, and I believe we should see an announcement this year banning the import and export of hunting trophies, and maybe others will follow that lead.
Oh, amazing, thank you. So I mean, that's been some really tragic stuff caught up in the sort of the rays of positivity. And so thank you so much. Well, I mean, in terms of just to end on a positive note, in terms of things to do, I know there's a few of us. Man will happily help. He's just messaged again. You guys get it set up so that you can receive crypto donations, and hopefully that will bring in some more funds from people that have held cryptocurrency that has gone up in value. I know, I'm sure Magnus will be happy to speak further and share some ideas. I'll be happy to introduce you to some of the companies that I know will have already said that they would be keen to help on the sort of the NFT front, so that's sort of creating digital versions of things. So you'd have to bring in a graphic designer or something to sort of draw things or draw animals, but again, that's something that can be sold or passed on or used to raise sponsorship for animals. So there's a lot of ideas out there that I think just using technology that already exists, or even Magnus's idea of what Plastic Bank are doing, a way to sort of have a digital currency that pays local people to do good things, and that pays them in a digital currency that can be traded directly for food or medicine or whatever that is. So the technology is already out there and has already been used by other companies with other aims. So in theory, it doesn't need to be built from scratch at great expense, which is good news. So
that is good news. And thank you to everybody who's I haven't been able to see the chat, but I know that you've had quite a lot, and it's fantastic to hear the enthusiasm and support that you have all been offering, and I'm deeply humbled by it. It's amazing.
No, so thank you so much